Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain Khan. The Iranian covert ops and proxy wars have been going on since a very long time. They've increased post-2003 Iraq invasion, but now for the very first time the two countries are on the brink of going head-to-head after the recent execution of the Shia Cleric al-Nimr in Saudi Arabia. Today in our show we will discuss the impacts of Saudi-Iranian tensions in Pakistan, a country that's being constantly pressurized to choose a side. Today we have with us Raza Rumi, a senior political commentator from DC, joining us on Tactical Talk. Welcome to our show, Raza Rumi. This is Zain Khan. Thanks for taking out the time.
Thank you so much, Zain, for having me over again. I always enjoy talking to you, and these are important issues.
Raza, what is the impact of Saudi-Iranian tensions in the Middle East?
So the situation in Middle East has obviously flared up, and it has taken an ominous turn because this age-old rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It has been. It also reflects, number one, the sectarian divide, which is sort of embedded within the history of Islam itself. But since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution, which was later called, the geopolitical sort of rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia has been the underlying theme in the last 3 decades or so. And, with the execution of Sheikh al-Nimr, plus, the calling off or breaking off of the diplomatic ties between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states also downgrading their links with their relationships with Iran, this spells almost like a kind of doomsday scenario, because already these two countries are fighting several proxy wars, particularly in Syria, where Assad's regime is being fully supported by Iran and now Russia, and in Yemen, Saudi Arabia fears that the Houthi rebels, or who are also by faith known as Zaydiya, a kind of a subsect of the Shiite Islam, though they are closer to Sunnis than to Orthodox Shias. And Saudi Arabia has been bombing Yemen throughout, and this can actually escalate further if it is not brought down. So it's a very dangerous scenario. Most of all, it is worrying for the Muslims themselves, because at the end of the day, these wars and conflicts and proxy militias, what they do is that they harm ordinary lives. And we have seen what has happened, in terms of Syria, where 12 million people are refugees in their, either they're outside Syria or within their own country, they're displaced. And, we read horror stories every day. So I think this has to be really, really sort of stopped and fixed before it gets out of hand.
Raza, will Pakistan be affected?
Well, obviously Pakistan, is likely to be affected because for 2 or 3 reasons. First, that Pakistan has after Iran, world's largest Shia population. So we don't know the exact numbers, but it is anywhere between 15 to 20 or 25% of the total Muslim population, which is huge in terms of numbers. 200 million Pakistanis, 95% are Muslims, and within that 95%, if you calculate, there's a big number of Shia population. So if Pakistan takes a position which is seen as either pro-Saudi or pro-Iran or along the sectarian lines, it can have domestic repercussions. The second reason is Pakistan has suffered due to the sectarian conflicts, unleashed since the 1980s. Huge losses we have seen, whether it is the Shia targeting of doctors, professionals, or the Hazaras in Balochistan and elsewhere. So that is a major kind of a threat. The third reason is that, Pakistan has a historical link and friendship with Saudi Arabia. So, and it is a defense pact. So there's a binding constraint here. Pakistan is committed, according to that defense pact, to put its effort into the defense of Saudi Arabia. This was signed, I think, in early 1980s. So all these things require that we have to do a very careful, tight rope walking, where we do not annoy Saudi Arabia because, number one, it's an old friend. Millions of Pakistanis work in Saudi Arabia. They send millions of dollars in remittances, which keeps our economy going. At the same time, we're in a neighborhood where Iran is our next door neighbor, and we have a large Shia population. So what do we do? So in these circumstances, we have to take a position which is neutral, which is statesman-like, which does not lead to flaring up of any sectarian conflict, and which also sort of gives us the diplomatic room to maneuver and play the role of a kind of a facilitator of peace between these two Middle East powers. You see, the other underlying thing is that Saudi Arabia, since the Iranian Revolution, came very close to the US and the Western world. And for decades, it was the key ally of the US and European powers. But of late, things have changed. I mean, of course, the Iraq invasion by the US was the first historical event that tilted Iranian power, because when Saddam regime fell, a Shiite regime emerged there, because it's a majority Shia country which falls under the Iranian orbit now. Similarly, in Syria, the Assad, despite all the efforts by West and Saudi Arabia and Gulf states, Turkey has not fallen. His government, his army is intact, and the Syrian government is intact. So, which has also bolstered Iranian sort of influence. And now this competing of two influences is where Pakistan is being dragged. And let's hope that our military and civilian leaders play a very wise sort of role instead of jumping into a fire pit.
Raza Rumi, do you think Pakistan should be joining the coalition?
Well, Pakistan, I think, must not join the Saudi coalition. Of course, easier said than done, because I said, there's a defense pact and there's a historical relationship. There are all these migrant workers. But what Pakistan can do is perhaps convince Saudi Arabia, because it's a friend of Pakistan, and Pakistan has leverage with other world powers like the US, like China, like Russia, that can also start kind of diplomatic parlays with Saudi Arabia, that if it is interested in making a coalition against terrorism, which is a welcome step, because I think at the end of the day, groups like ISIS, etc., cannot be undone without the full support of Muslim countries and Muslims themselves. So it's a good idea in principle. So what Pakistan needs to do is to actually convince Saudi Arabia to include Iran and not turn it into a sectarian war on terror, because that is going to create more terrorism, unfortunately. So I think Pakistan's joining of this coalition should be subject to this being a broad-based coalition. The world's major Muslim countries with influence and power happen to be, in this Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Indonesia, Turkey, Iran, and Malaysia to some degree because of its economic prowess, and of course the Gulf state, the rich oil Gulf states, and somehow they have to find a common ground. I mean, ISIS affects everybody. It is not just Saudi Arabia or just the Gulf states or Iran. It's a threat to global security, and because of ISIS's ideology and the things they do, Muslims are being hounded across the globe. There's profiling, there's Islamophobia growing. So it is in the interest of Muslim states to actually not indulge in these proxy support for militias, and in fact find diplomatic ways to the problem, take the bull by its horns. So I think Pakistan has to play a very careful and wise role and not immediately join the coalition. That's my personal view, but then, those who decide in Pakistan will decide anyway.
Raza, how do you think we can counter the menace of sectarianism within Pakistan?
Well, I mean, the sectarian menace in Pakistan has grown so much. You see, as I mentioned before, that, after throughout Pakistan's history, there has been an effort to move Pakistani states direction as a Sunni state. And one of the historical incidences that Mr. Jinnah, the founder of the country, Quaid-e-Azam, was a Shiite by faith. He had converted from Ismaili faith to Shia faith as a 12er, and there's documentation to that effect. There's a court case pending on that. And when his funeral was to be done in 1948, there was a huge row between the clerics, and because the state wanted to give him a Sunni funeral, and his family, Miss Fatima Jinnah and others, wanted a Shia funeral. So actually, there were two funerals for Quaid-e-Azam. But anyway, this fault line was always there, but it was not as violent or as, because in Pakistan, the communities are intertwined. There's a historical relationship of amity and peace between Shias and Sunnis, and, it was never a violent sort of a relationship until the 1980s, until Pakistan put its weight behind the Saudi fears of an Iran which had turned a theocracy and was vowing to promote the Iranian revolution abroad, and since 1980s, and then the whole Afghanistan war, and the growth of sectarian militias in Pakistan with Saudi funding, unfortunately has torn apart our social fabric. Look at the numbers. I mean, hundreds of Shia doctors in Karachi have been killed in the last decade or so. Hazaras in huge numbers, whether they're in Quetta, whether they're on their buses going for pilgrimages, are targeted and brutally murdered. And then, because ordinarily Pakistani does not feel that hatred for Shia. You see, that is the whole thing. It is not, it has, despite all these investments in seminaries and madrasas and the hate ideologies, if you talk to a common Pakistani, they don't show that hatred for, a Pakistani Sunni does not hate the Pakistani Shia, and Pakistani Shia does not hate the Pakistani Sunni. It is at a different level. It is a level of politics and militancy. So one good thing that has come out of recent military action has been a very precise targeting of Lashkar-e-Jhangvi. And they have eliminated the leadership of it. They have also gone for the second tier. I am a victim according to the police case and all of that. So, I mean, I cannot deny this fact that things are taking a different turn. But we need to do certainly more, particularly these seminaries which train young kids into hatred, into this whole culture of otherizing the Shia population. That has to stop. Similarly, I think the other important factor here is that, all these, clerics, because we gave a lot of airtime, in the 1980s, I grew up watching anti-Shia clerics on Pakistan TV. They were given so much of patronage and time and space that we have, they influence these young minds. There's hate speech issue everywhere. You see on the walls, Shia kafir hai, or the Shia as an apostate as a wall chalking. People who do this have to be punished. And some action has been taken under NAP, but much, much more needs to be done. So I think our mosque madrasa sort of nexus, which promotes this Wahhabi anti-Shia ideology, that has to be tackled, which preach sectarian hatred. Frankly, there's no other way. Those you have to give them a notice that they have to show their curricula, they have to show who's teaching, what is being taught. If they don't comply, state has to go and shut it down. Unfortunately, we can't suffer anymore. I mean, how many more Pakistanis would be killed before we wake up and nab it?
Thank you so much, Mr. Raza Rumi, for being in our show. It was a pleasure having you on Tactical Talk.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, Zen, and hope to talk to you again. We have a long list of things that we need to talk about.
This was Raza Rumi explaining the impacts of the Saudi-Iranian tension within Pakistan, the sectarian problems we might face, and also their solution. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.